look, it's really hard to predict the downfall of authoritarian regimes more broadly, and it certainly is difficult to predict when particular dictators are replaced by their potential successors. But how realistic do you think it is that there's going to be some real change in the Russian government, and how much is that going to matter? So even if Putin is replaced by some other political figure or by some oligarch, how likely is that to actually change Russia's posture in this war?
Such great questions and so unknowable. But, I would have a few months ago have sort of dismissed the idea that Putin's going to fall as being sort of overly optimistic, trying for us to sort of find some Deus ex machina out of this crisis. But actually, I look at this now and it just looks like Putin's support is really looking cagey. He didn't want to mobilize for a reason. And that reason was he knew a war that he could prosecute while sparing his population and keeping them quiescent is going to look very different once people and young men are hauled off to be fed into the meat grinder. And that is already provoking protest, particularly in poorer areas among ethnic minorities in places like Dagestan. But I think that what's happening is people who were willing to tolerate the conflict in Russia because it didn't really affect them are actually going to find that the war is touching them in interesting ways. So to give you an example of this, look how many people have fled, right? 200,000 Russians, as we speak, have fled to Kazakhstan. 70,000 have fled to Georgia. 66,000 have fled to the European Union, even though Latvia, Estonia, Finland have basically shut their borders. We are witnessing a mass exodus. And when we hear the Russians talk about 300,000 reservists, I don't believe that. I think this is going to be a rolling campaign of mobilization, as many as it takes, as long as it takes, to prolong this war, because he hopes that for the reasons we've outlined, European cohesion will crumble. So I think that his position is quite shaky, much shakier than we've presently thought. And look at the astonishing attacks on him from people who were effectively Kremlin loyalists, right? Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen government. We've seen that. We've seen some incredible stuff. We've seen attacks recently on, for example, Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, and Gerasimov, but that's only because people can't attack Putin directly. They're sort of shields for that. Now, what replaces him? This is the really interesting question, because you look around him, I look at his war cabinet, the people around him, they're all ex-KGB men. The head of, Bortnikov, Narishkin, Shoigu, all these people, they're in their late 60s, and they're all heavily sanctioned. So it's not as if they're kind of liberals in waiting who can hit the reset button the minute he's off the scene. So I think some of these scenarios we have to think about are not necessarily, there may be shock scenarios where he leaves and there's chaos and there's anarchy. It's possible, and we in Europe have to be prepared for it. But I think just as likely would be kind of a post Khrushchev scenario, being eased out by his cabinet gently, quietly, and then you have a few years of change, or the post-Brezhnev transition, which took several years to get to a Gorbachev-like figure who could really reset relations with the West. So I think we have to not pin our hopes on a transformative change as soon as he's gone.